they had guys in glass cubicles on a stage with showers above them, showering in front of a group standing in the audience.
Welcome to another episode of the Gay Barchives Show, where we explore gay history one bar at a time. I'm your host, Art Smith, and our special guest today is Mike Balaban, also known as Bammer47. Mike has been referred to as the accidental historian and has a vast collection of videos regarding gay history in his YouTube channel. So welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you very much, Art. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's always nice to meet somebody who has a passion for gay history. And I know you've referred to yourself as the accidental historian, which is kind of a boat that I think I'm in as well. Um, you just start down that path, and the next thing you know, it takes on a life of its own. So it's been really refreshing to watch some of your YouTube videos and to see, what your take is on your gay experience through the last 30 or 40 years. And now I'm looking forward to finding out about some of your New York City gay bar experiences. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure. The only slight addendum is I say accidental gay historian to be very clear that I don't lay claim to the broader rubric.
Yeah, I'm the same way. In fact, I think my LinkedIn profile says gay barchivist.
That's a good way to describe it.
So speaking of gay bars, when we've talked previously, you had mentioned that one of the bars you want to talk about is perhaps one of the most iconic gay bars on the planet, even though a lot of people may not recognize the name immediately or know the history behind it. But the Eagle's Nest in New York has inspired, let's say, more other gay bars than any gay bar I'm aware of. There are probably over history at least 50 Eagles around the world. So tell us a little bit about the Eagle's Nest.
Well, let me predate my involvement with it. It opened in 1930 and was a waterfront straight bar by and large for 40 years. And I don't know what precipitated it. In 1970, it became a gay bar. And it pretty much remained, available to our community until they shut, I think around 2011. I have to double check. But when I began going, it was around 1979. I was 27. I've been kind of out, but not really for a couple of years. And I finally began exploring and going out. And a couple of friends took me to the Eagle's Nest, which later got truncated to just the Eagle. And as an aside, there is a current Eagle bar in New York, only about 7 or 8 blocks north of where the original one was. And there is no correlation, no connection, and it's much different. It's huger. There's a big dance floor. There's an area to play around in. It's great if you want a little bit of everything, but it's not what the original Eagle's Nest was, which was a very, I don't know what the right word is, iconic, place to meet for a certain type of individual or fetish. It was a leather bar. It was all about leather and denim. If you arrived wearing tennis shoes or a Lacoste shirt, you were going to probably get rejected. They had the hottest soundtrack in any bar in New York. It was amazing. You just couldn't stop moving, but no dancing was allowed because that didn't fit the image. And there were a couple labyrinthine ways around the place, but generally people would be kind of, their hands hooked in their denim jean pockets, leaning back against a counter, kind of showing themselves off to good advantage. So as you did your tour through the premise, you'd see them and they'd see you. And that was it. It was just a place to go and cruise back in an era when cruising was it. There weren't places to meet. If you were gay, you didn't know where they were. There were no apps. So basically you had to either use your eyes and nose to sniff out, the availability of gay men by how they were dressed or how they were looking at each other, or you had to go to known places like the Eagle. Now, there was also a circuit It was on the West Side Highway at 21st Street in Manhattan. And when you got tired of the Eagle, you walked a block and a half south along the waterfront, and you would poke your head into the Spike, which was a sister leather bar. And it was not as much to my liking because I'm not really into the fetish so much as I am the men. And it was pretty serious leather. It's kind of an ominous vibe there, even at times. But you go back and forth between the two. And that was my experience of downtown Manhattan in 1979.
Yeah, and at that time, for people who were not around or maybe not familiar with the scene back then, the Levi leather segment was a big segment of the gay community, for men particularly. And most cities had some sort of a bar. There were a lot of names that came up repeatedly. There was Rawhide was one of them that you saw frequently. There are a number of manhandlers and all kinds of different names. There were some mining companies and a variety of different names that all kind of catered to the same community, to the leather community. And a lot of them at that time had very strict guidelines. You had to be wearing leather, or you had to take your shirt off. Um, harnesses were acceptable, boots and things of that nature. No colognes in most of them, no dancing, no drag queens. So they were a very hardcore kind of bar. As we all know, in later days and most recently, a lot of the Eagles that still exist have kind of morphed into still predominantly male bars, but very often allowing the bear community, the drag community, the pup community, a variety of things that you never would have seen. And of course, dancing is generally not disallowed anymore in most Eagles.
There were two things. One, there were fewer communities. There was no bear community. So
Right.
basically, my memory, and maybe you can come up with an addition to it, there were basically the macho, kind of fetish leather, hardcore masculinity. There were the preppies, and there were the effeminate guys, the guys who were, accentuating their effeminacy and the qualities that they had always been told gay men exhibited. Can you think of another group besides those three?
Not really. I mean, you had, the drag community, but that wasn't necessarily part of the male community so
Right.
much. Um, but for the most part, that was it. And of course, things were different then. So, like, I was reminiscing with a friend not too long ago about a bar that I used to go to in Atlanta in the early 80s. And it was exactly as you said, extremely preppy. Nobody ever went there in torn jeans or cut off shorts or sloppy attire. Very often they were starch button downs or, polos or izods. Um,
Khaki shorts
and
or
99% of the population of that bar was white male.
yeah,
And it was just normal. Nobody thought about it. You didn't think,
which
oh
is
my
which
God,
is a real statement in Atlanta, which is one of our more integrated cities. And I went to a Hotlanta private pool party, and I've featured this on my Instagram and on my YouTube channel in 1991 and again in 1992. It was private. I got invited. Oddly or ironically, I was being hosted by a black friend who was a resident doctor and had no time to join me at the parties, but he was welcome. When you look at my photos from that era, there are 300 muscular white men, not one black guy. And you sit there and think they would have been welcome, but they never got the word because they weren't part of the social scene.
exactly. I lived in Atlanta at that time, and you're exactly right. There was nothing integrated about a lot of the bars and circuit parties and things of that nature. And certainly they would have known about the Hotlanta River Expo because that had been going on by that time for about 5 years. It had been around for a while, so it was an established event that drew hundreds or thousands of people from around mostly the South um, in the heat of August, 100-degree weather and 100% humidity in Atlanta. And the focal event, of course, was to raft down the muddiest, grungiest river on the planet, the
Chattahoochee.
Chattahoochee. But we had a great time. So,
Well, thing is, what I discovered the second year was most of the guys were so bent out from 4 straight nights of partying that by the time Sunday morning rolled around and the raft race took place, they didn't get out of bed. Less than half the people went to the race. They were there for the private parties and the disco nights.
absolutely. So, having set that stage for, what gay life was like in the late 70s, um, you also mentioned there were a couple of other bars that you kind of evolved into around 1980. One of them was Wildwood. What was Wildwood like?
So I lived on the Upper West Side, which is a beautiful neighborhood and now one of the most popular, but it had gone through a period of of ruin. And if you strayed too far off Central Park West, you were even worried about crime. But on Columbus Avenue, the next street over, a series of bars popped up in the late 70s, early 80s through 90s. And the two that were connected, related, one was the Wildwood, which was a peanut or sawdust on the floor. I can't remember which, but definitely a West country and Western bar with country and Western music and very relaxed and kind of almost kind of a parallel to the leather bar scene, right? There were bars all over Throckmorton Mining Company and everything, like you said, in Dallas that were like that. So one of my first bars I went into was that where I met the guy who would become my best friend. And 3 blocks or so down the street, there was another place owned by the same guys called Pershing's, which was a kind of a low-key bar with a restaurant cafe attached. And so when you wanted to chat with your friends or maybe meet somebody in a quieter ambiance, you went there. When you wanted to maybe pick somebody up and go home with them, you went to the Wildwood. So, my memory is not very distinct because it was kind of an occasional neighborhood place to go to, but it was the liveliest and the one that most suited my, my affinity.
Now, was the Wildwood, would it be considered a large bar or was it like a small neighborhood
It's
space?
a small neighborhood bar. I mean, my guess is probably not more than 30, 40 feet wide and 100 feet deep, you know, but it was always crowded and popular.
Did they have a dance floor at that time?
No, there was no space for it. And
Uh,
it
the,
might not have been allowed.
that's true too. These days, of course, most country western bars have dance floors because line dancing craze has continued for the last 20 years, and everybody wants to go out in their cowboy boots and Stetson hats and show off. So
I think that spread from the South and Southwest to the rest of the country in the 90s.
so both Wildwood and Pershing's you went to on a regular basis in the 80s.
Right. My best friend and a girlfriend of his and I would have powwow dinners for 3 hours at Pershing. It was just a hangout spot, where you felt comfortable because being gay, you didn't always want to go to the normal cafes and restaurants. You wanted your own place. And places like Food Bar that would later become the big go-to restaurant down in Chelsea when it took over as the gay epicenter were not yet in existence.
Right. And another thing, again, I feel obligated to remind people that were not around at that time or weren't in the gay scene. This is only 10 or 15 years after Stonewall. So this is still a tenuous time where, people were looked down upon by the general society for being gay. And it went so far, even in cities that were more liberal, like New York or even Atlanta, that if you went with a group of 3 or 4 guys to have dinner together somewhere, people stared at you like, where are the women and why are you here? And they made suppositions that we would never make today. But back then, we needed those kind of spaces. We needed the restaurants we could go to and not be stared at and not be, treated differently or mistreated by the servers or, heckled or whatever. So,
Let's remember that homosexuality as a diagnostic disorder in the Book of Diagnostic Disorders was not removed until 1973, and it was still considered an affliction until 1987. So
Right.
we had all kinds of punishment awaiting us, and you did your best to remain below the radar. I worked on Wall Street, and there was absolutely no way I could have given any hint that I might be gay. It would have either ended my job or not resulted in me being compensated appropriately. So you created two lifestyles, one with your straight friends and family if you weren't out, and one with your gay friends. And if you were partnered, you and your partner lived in separate apartments, maintaining the artifice of two different lives when in fact you were boyfriends.
Right. Or at the very least, two separate bedrooms. If you did happen to share an apartment, you have to keep a fake bedroom just in case.
But even that, it was perilously close to revealing who you were, and
Right.
people want it known.
Absolutely. And as you've mentioned in some of your videos on YouTube, there were a lot of ramifications that could come out of that. Not only could you lose your job, but in many cities, you could lose your housing. You would lose, family and friends, and you would be completely ostracized. I mean, you would have, no recourse at all. You would be a complete outsider. It'd be like being banished from the kingdom.
I
And
get, I get plenty of young people on my Instagram, which is oddly YouTube is 55 and older, and Instagram is under 44. I go figure. I think it's the short-term attention span on Instagram, but they will. For a while, when I first started, I got hundreds of people saying, God, I wish I lived then, because there's a nostalgia now for the 70s and 80s and all of the simplicity and naturalness and the lack of self-awareness of beauty, straight men in particular, but even gay men. We weren't taking selfies. We were living life, and there were no apps, and they long for that kind of existence. And I get it, but they're not mindful of these other costs, much less the fact that we went to a decade and a half of AIDS and all the scars that brought with it.
absolutely. And, well, I want to take this moment to commend you for, your archiving of all the photographs, because I lived through that same era. I came out in the late 70s, like 77, 78, to my first gay bar experiences. And I never dreamed of taking pictures of me and my boyfriend or, events that I went to. I was at a lot of those Atlanta River Expo events and a lot of, gay pride events in different places. And I never thought of taking photographs to preserve those memories because it was kind of taboo. Um, Even when you worked in the media, which I did, I worked for a couple of different gay magazines over the years. They were very cautious about what pictures you could take and publish because there might be somebody in there who was in the closet or who might lose their job, or maybe they're a family law attorney and they don't want their clients to find out that they're gay when they're dealing with, a divorce at that time. So there was a lot of restrictions back then, and you managed somehow, along with several other people, to preserve aspects of that culture that might not otherwise be preserved. So I want to commend you for that because your photographs, bring back a lot of memories.
Thank you. That really gets to the source of my being an accidental gay historian. I, for some reason, have always had an archival bent. I've just felt the need to save images of myself, my friends, my family, whatever, certainly hot guys that I met. And I took these photos for me. I didn't think I'd ever show them to anybody else. It was for my own memories, and I have 14 albums in a cabinet, with 5,000 photos that I took starting in the 70s right up to when digital took over in 2000 or so. And I am only now, for the first time, going back to the negatives, and I'm going to have my first museum, photographic exhibit later this year and start selling. Until now, this was all my own personal collection. And it was only around 2016 when I retired and was kind of a little bored that I put a few up. What the hell? And I got dozens more likes than I did with my normal photos. particularly my thirst traps of gay men in Speedos. And, there is the whole question of what you're permitted to share, and the whole idea of street photography, which is a culture in the US and not in Europe. But I've carefully tried to tread that ground and be sensitive to. And whenever I rarely, but occasionally get a request from someone that I remove a photo of theirs, I have done that.
I just attended an event last month that I think is going to be traveling in various places across the country, and it starts out in New York. There's a photographer there, and you may have known her because I know from my watching of your videos and reading some of your blogs that you spent a number of summers in Fire Island. And there was a female photographer back then by the name of Meryl Meisner, who now I think is 75 years old or so. And she took roll after roll after roll of black and white photographs of the guys on Fire Island and in various places in New York City. And she has published several books now of her photographs. And Robert Bonanno, who runs the Fire Island Pines Historical Society, has taken that on tour in conjunction with a Fire Island tea dance revival program he's taking to gay bars. And I witnessed the response of people looking at black and white photographs from Fire Island, candid shots, nothing posed, nothing studio, from back in the 70s and 80s. And it's amazing the response it gets. So I am sure that your photographs will have a similar response once they get out there to the public, other than just through social media and YouTube.
I may have seen, you said Michelle Meisner? What's your first name?
Meryl, Meryl
I
Meisner.
may have seen some of her photos. Do you know Clamp Art in New York, an art gallery? They
I
had
do.
a female photographer's works there the last time I visited, but I'm not sure it's her. The other person I thought you were going to name was Nora Burns. Do you know Nora?
I do not.
You should look up her work as well. She does a one-woman performance art show about her friend David, who died of AIDS, but she's got photos going back into the 70s as well, and they're quite memorable.
Yeah, and it's so rewarding to have other people who take that same perspective that we want to share it. I got the same kind of negative feedback in the beginning where people are like, who wants to see this stuff? Who cares about a bar that closed 40 years ago or whatever? But as time has gone on, that's grown substantially. And my Facebook group now has right at 8,000 members that all talk about gay bar history. And every day I learn about a new bar that I've never heard of before, or a new experience that I've never heard. And I've seen people connect by putting up a post of, something they did 35 years ago in Manhattan, and somebody who lives in Wisconsin sees it and says, "Oh, that was me. I was there. I was the guy with," and they connect after 35 years from a single post on Facebook. So, it's very rewarding. I'm sure it is for you too, when people tell you, "Oh, wow, thank you so much for sharing this because it brought back so many good memories. I'd almost forgotten about that bar or that event or whatever."
Yeah, I get no pleasure greater in life out of than connecting with people myself and introducing other friends to each other. To me, life is about being social, and I can't imagine what it would like to be introverted and not have this joy I get from it. But my Instagram, I've got 27,000 followers now, and it's brought me together with so many people. I have BAMR meetups when I travel to Lisbon or Barcelona or Tel Aviv or Puerto Vallarta, and I'll announce that I'm going to be in a certain area, and 10 or 15 people will show up, and it's about meeting me, but it's also about meeting each other and convening over the stories we have to share about our past.
Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about the Eagle's Nest in New York and Wildwood and Pershing's. And then you move into the later part of the 80s and into the 90s with a bar called Cahoots. Now that's one I have never heard of before today. So tell me about Cahoots.
Cahoots was very definitely a preppy bar, and it was decorated in neon pastels, like pink and green. It's really quite loud, and you went there generally dressed in your preppy wear. And it was really comfortable. Unlike maybe a slightly more leathery oriented bar, there wasn't the intensity that visibly hit you when you walked in. And yet, a block and a half down the street, both on Columbus Avenue, opened the Works. And the Works had like steam pipes throughout it, and that kind of very industrial, plumber, pipe fitter, whatever kind of atmosphere. And it was black except for those pipes, and quiet, and intense, because it was a cruise bar. And so I don't quite know how we navigated between the two, given the different dress codes, but somehow or other I made both in the same evening. And you're more likely to pick up somebody at the Works, but you're more likely to meet somebody you might want to know more than just for the evening in Cahoots. And so they existed together for a number of years. And I'm not quite sure why, but Cahoots went out of business. And I believe the Works moved into the space that had been occupied by Cahoots on the same corner. I think it might have been 80th and Columbus Avenue. And so neither of them are there today, but they existed, one of them for at least 5 to 10 years and the other for 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, and at this time, we're talking about the 80s and into the early 90s. At that time, that was kind of the summit for gay bar exposure, gay bars being visible and around. You were getting to a point where in most major cities, there were not, like in New York City, not dozens, but probably 100 gay bars if you looked hard enough. I mean,
more than that. Probably 200 or 300.
They were everywhere. I mean,
particularly if you included Jackson Heights in Queens,
right,
and Bronx, and New York City, there were several hundred. And partly because of the pandemic, partly because, or more likely because of the movement to apps and the rising rents that were charged for the spaces, by 2022, we had something like less than a third or a quarter of the original number.
Yeah, things have changed quite a bit. Although I have read that since the pandemic, post-pandemic numbers for gay bars are going up. Now, there's a little caveat there, because as you've touched on in some of your interviews before, and as I've discovered in my research, the definition of a gay bar is completely different now than it was in the 80s and 90s. I mean, those bars that you've talked about, even Wildwood, Pershing's, Cahoots, the Works, they were 99% male gay clientele. Maybe an occasional bi or, ally type friend might wander into some of those, but 99% of the people that went to those bars were gay males. And the women's bars were the same way. Most of the lesbian bars were 99% women. You did not see a lot of crossover. Toward the end of the disco era, you started to see that change because it was a different type of bar. It was a bigger bar, it was flashier, it had a dance floor, it was playing the best music that was in town, and you started to see integration in the bar scene. But earlier than that, they were, very distinct types of bars. And as you mentioned, Cahoots was a preppy type bar. So you would have dressed in a, polo shirt or a button down and gone in there. And I understand the conflict of going, across the street and going to the Works, and you can't go into the Works in a starched button down and khakis. It doesn't fit the mold of the bar. So yeah, what did you do? Rip off your shirt and maybe your pants were not quite so preppy? You're wearing a nice pair of jeans and you got away with it? I don't know.
Well, there
But
were two things. Number one, those bars were safe spaces because they were the only places we could congregate. That need wasn't as great by the late 90s, right?
right.
Number one. Number two, gay bars were sexist. They didn't allow women in. And the way they kept them out was they had a policy of no open-toed shoes. And so, on the one hand, I'm glad that we don't have that blanket prohibition. On the other hand, some of the bars in recent years have become so populated by hen parties, wedding, that they've basically taken over our spaces. Somebody told me a story that's kind of hard to believe, that a housewife type ended up in the Eagle, and she's sitting there with her camera and wanting to take a picture of two guys having sex in the corner. And she asked somebody, and they're sitting there thinking, lady, you shouldn't even be here, much less
Right.
taking photos of this. So I don't know the truth of that, but these barriers have broken down. And then the final thing is, I think it may have reversed slightly in the last year or two, but the lesbian bars had almost gone out of existence. By the pandemic, there were like 16 lesbian bars left across the whole country.
Yes, and I have interviewed numerous lesbians who have been in the bar business. Not a single one of them has told me that she would ever open up another bar for women. And they all cite the same basic reasons. Reason number one, lesbians generally don't go out as often as gay men. It's a different lifestyle. And especially when you're going back to the 80s, I went out 8 nights a week. I mean, I didn't care if it was a school night or not. After dinner, you went there because that was where your community was. That's where you met other guys. That's where your friends hung out. That's where you could have conversations and, meet a hookup or whatever it was that you had in mind. So, number one was the fact that, the lesbians just don't support their bars as much. When they do go out, they nurse a draft beer for 4 hours and play a free game of pool. And this is coming from other lesbian bar owners, so I'm not making this up. And another one is that in most gay bars that I've been to, I don't think I've ever seen a fight break out. But in lesbian bars, it's a regular occurrence. I mean, these lesbian bar owners are telling me, yes, we had extra security on when it was, a big women's event because we knew there was going to be fights.
That's why the merchants in P-Town used to hate Baby Dyke Week on Memorial Day weekend, because there was that fight scene that happened, regularly.
But what we are seeing now, and I think this goes to what I was saying earlier about, an increase in the number of gay bars, LGBTQIA plus spaces, is that a lot of the bars, even bars that historically were as male focused as the Eagles, are allowing women in. You're seeing a lot of Eagles. I can think of several, Baltimore, Atlanta, Wilton Manors, Las Vegas, that all have, some sort of a drag program going on sometime in their schedule, that have women that attend the bars on a regular basis. Some of them have even had like a Sunday tea dance for women or something of that nature. So while we're seeing, an increase maybe in the number of spaces that welcome LGBTQ people and actually advertise to the community and support the community and nonprofit benefits and things of that nature, a lot of those spaces are more blended than they were. The number of men's bars is definitely going down. And as you said, the number of women's bars has all but disappeared, but there are a lot of spaces that are just anything goes, gay, straight, whatever.
Well, there's a kind of a two-sidedness in my reaction to that. As a gay man who used to love gay-only spaces, there's kind of a melancholy to the loss of that gathering spot, right? On the other hand, I have to acknowledge that the fact that we are now a much broader community in terms of types of identities and representation, and everybody deserves to be represented, that it is healthy that, in fact, we're having meeting spaces that welcome everyone.
Right. And a lot of them, like the Eagle in Wilton Manors, I know the owner well. I've been there many times. And they still have on the weekends, I think it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they have a code enforced area in the bar. So you have to go through the old standards: no cologne, no shirt, harness, leather pants, whatever. And they still do that. And they still draw a 99% male crowd. It's a rare occasion that you see a lot of women there after 10 o'clock at night.
I'm surprised that they can do that without running into legal problems, but glad to hear it.
I think it's a matter of desire. I don't think the women necessarily want to be around it.
Right.
But it is important that we have so many spaces that, allow us to be ourselves. And to me, the important thing is people keep saying, oh, well, the gay bar is disappearing. It's not going to go anywhere. We still, just like people of color, just like Jewish people or Italian people or Polish people, we all want to have our own community spaces. And just because a Jewish person or a person of color can go into almost any place and have a drink or a meal, they still want their own spaces because they still have a community identity that they can't relate to in a more blended society. So yes, you can go to Applebee's and have dinner, but you're probably going to not meet 20 other people who want to form a gay softball league at Applebee's. You're not going to go table to table and find these people.
I tend to give a similar example for the same phenomenon. I will say the reason why we need gay spaces in the same way that Jews and blacks and others maintain those long after integration has been successfully implemented is that we're the only ones that know what we went through. And in order to get to where we are in terms of self-acceptance. And if you, let's say you and your husband join a country club in the suburbs and you bring your kids there for the first day and the husband's parking in the car and you've got the kids and somebody walks over to you, let's say a nice heterosexual couple. I don't know what, darling children, where's your wife? And you have to say, I'm not married, my husband's parking the car. You don't want to have to explain that over and over and over, that coming out process. When you're in a place where it's all gay, you just know that they get it and you can exist and be yourself and not have to think about it.
I've heard that same exact explanation on the Bammer 47 YouTube channel. Do you know that guy?
Yeah, I've used it before.
But it is so true. And so most of these spaces you're talking about so far have all been kind of old school gay spaces. But the last one that you mentioned to me is one that there have also been at least a dozen or more using that same name, but it was an iconic concept that took New York City and the world by storm. It's a bar called Splash. And everybody seems to know about Splash. Whether they've even ever been to New York City, Splash had a reputation. What, in your opinion, was the most unique thing about Splash in 1991 when they opened?
Well, the timing was right. The space was huge, which for New York City was rare. And the two owners, Brian Lendesh and Harry Bartell, were people I knew. I would say acquaintances more than friends. And they got this idea to import a concept that I believe started in Vancouver, in a bar club there, where they had guys in glass cubicles on a stage with showers above them, showering in front of a group standing in the audience and lathering up with soap. And, they had to keep their bathing suit or their jock strap or something on. Or maybe they took it off and covered their crotches, but you weren't allowed to show full nudity. But it was enough of a tease. And that was the gimmick that when it hit New York, it was like a storm. It's like everybody wanted to go. And it quickly became among the most popular and gradually the most popular bar in the city. And it was always crowded, and they hosted a lot of charity benefits there as well. And gradually, it just got to be such an institution. And unfortunately, I think they got a little caught up in the scene, which is easy to do when you're in that kind of world all the time. And it opened in 1991, and I think it closed maybe around 2010. But in 2001, Harry, the younger of the two guys, died ostensibly of a drug overdose. I don't know the facts, and it was tragic. He was such a sweet, amazing guy that everybody liked. And whatever the story was, Splash continued on and was just as popular. So I think it was more the timing and that gimmick that just took the city by storm. And it had its almost 20-year run and then shut down.
And 20 years is a pretty good run for a gay bar. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, there are tons of gay bars that were open a year or less. In fact, I uncovered one in Atlanta that never opened.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? And there's been a couple like that, but this one in Atlanta, they had designed a logo, they had remodeled the building, they had their name and the big sign up on the building. It was called Cabaret After Dark, and the lettering looked like the lettering for the Broadway show Cabaret. You know, those kind of Hollywood lights with the little bulbs in them. And they have completely remodeled. They ran ads, and the morning that they were supposed to open, the morning of the day they were supposed to open, the building was torched and destroyed.
Wow.
So, but then that happened not infrequently in some cities as well, where there was suspicious fires. But anyway, 20 years is a pretty long run for most gay bars. There are not that many that the percentage of them that have lasted that long is pretty small. But it's nice to know that at least it's still remembered, and I still run into people who will comment about it, you know, and have memories of what their experience there, especially people that were younger in that time frame. So people that were in their 20s from 91 to 2010, those people seem to really like the energy of that bar. And
Where they came out.
absolutely. I unfortunately did not have any bars that extravagant around when I was a kid.
Where
But
did you come out? What was your first bar?
so my first gay bar experience was in Baltimore. I had a boyfriend in high school, but as you know, in the mid 70s to late 70s, I did not know that there was such a thing as a boyfriend. So I had a best friend that I did everything with, including vacations in the summer, and slept with and visited in college, but never labeled it as a boyfriend because I didn't know that there was such a thing. So I went down to visit him at school, and we went out to dinner in Baltimore, and he said, let's go up the street here. There's a bar that my roommate showed me that I think you'll really like. And so we went in there, and I ordered a drink at the bar, and I turned around, and I was on an elevated platform that was about maybe 3 feet high off the dance floor. And I went to the railing, and I'm looking at the dance floor, kind of feeling the music. And I looked at him after a minute or two, and I said, Mark, those are all guys on the dance floor. And he said, yep, it's a gay bar. It was called the Hippopotamus. It was probably at Baltimore's most iconic gay bar ever, located on Eager Street. And that was kind of the awakening for me. I'm sorry?
Was he trying to tell you something?
Was he trying to tell me something?
You weren't out, right?
Well, I mean, I was sleeping with him, but
Oh,
I
okay,
didn't.
never mind. Yeah.
He was kind of introducing me to the fact that there was a culture, that it
Right.
wasn't just an odd thing that happened between us and, you know, whatever. But we lived in different cities, and not too long after that, several years later, he passed away from AIDS. So, you know,
What year did he take you to the hippopotamus?
I want to say 78.
My first visit to a bar, I went to Brown University. I played football. I identified with that whole macho culture, and deep down, I was trying to hide from myself and the world any sense that I might actually be gay, because there was nobody like me who I saw, and I didn't identify with what I did see. And a fraternity brother or two and girlfriends somehow came up with the idea and drove us from Providence, Rhode Island to Boston to go to this disco called The Other Side, OS. And,
I'm familiar
and,
with it. It's right next to Jacques. It's like
it
catty
really,
corner from Jacques.
and it was I think it was really a mixed bar. maybe with a lot of gays, but and it was back during the era of the bump. Do you remember that
I
dance?
do.
So we're there, and I'm like covetously looking at people and trying to figure out who's gay and am I attracting anybody? But meanwhile, not admit it to myself. And that's my memory of the first time I ever was in a space, but I couldn't own it. I wasn't ready.
Yeah. Well, a number of years later, um, I had a boyfriend in Nashville, Tennessee, because I'd moved to Nashville for college. Um, and we went to Atlanta for New Year's Eve. It was 82, 83. And we went to Atlanta, and my experience there was at another bar that was owned by the same family that owned Jacques and the other side, which was called Backstreet in Atlanta.
Yep.
All of them owned by the Vera family. And I was so blown away by the magnitude of the bar and the number of people there and the energy that Chris and I, over the weekend that we were visiting, found an apartment, turned on our utilities, signed a lease. I found a job, and the next weekend we moved to Atlanta. And
Wow.
that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of impact that bars had on the community then, because when you found a place that you felt comfortable, you didn't think about dropping everything and going because you needed that. You couldn't live in Podunk, Iowa, with your head stuck in the sand for years and be unhappy. You had to be somewhere that you could, spread your wings a little bit. And so we did. And the rest is history, because ever since then, I've pretty much been immersed in gay bars one way or another. I actually put a post up the other day on my Instagram page that said, um, something like, a long time ago in a land far, far away, I spent almost every night in a gay bar. Things haven't changed much. And I posted a picture of myself from like 1980 or something. I can't remember. But it's just funny because it's true. I mean, I still am very connected with the gay bar community, although I don't go out to get drunk anymore. That's kind of water
Yeah,
under
but
the bridge.
it's part of your purpose. You're
Right,
documenting the history.
right. And it's such an important part of history because all of these things that, we talk about the bars and the impact they had on us personally, how they helped us, you know, understand our own lifestyle and our feelings and build our relationships. But they also had a big impact on the community, because almost every single thing that you think about in the gay community, whether it's civil rights or, gay marriage or military policy or anything, all evolved from the bars. There were all the Stonewalls and the Black Cats and the Black Knights and all these places that housed the revolutions that we had, that helped us fund the organizations that we built, like GLAD and all that. All these organizations came out of bars. They would not have been able to form at Applebee's. But the bar owners did benefits. The drag queens contributed their time. People went and marched down Washington together because it was organized through the bars. And so to me, it's very important that we chronicle as much of that information as we can and save it so that future generations who want to know what we went through and how the community evolved have that information available.
It'll be interesting to see how the gay bar spaces will evolve over the next 20 years. I mean, they're going to have to be there, but they may be different, both in terms of the constituencies they serve and the functions they provide.
Yeah. And I'm kind of living in a little bit of a bubble. I spend a lot of time, at least probably a week, a month or so, down in Wilton Manors. I live in Tampa, so it's not that it's a 4-hour drive. And Wilton Manors is kind of like the East Village was decades ago. Um, a 1 mile strip of Wilton Drive has something in the neighborhood of 26 gay liquor licenses, restaurants and bars, and they've had 3 open in the last 6 months, 3 new ones. So, it's a thriving environment that you don't see everywhere else. but it's also the kind of place where you can walk down the street with, a hot pink beard and stilettos and fishnets, and nobody's gonna say anything. I mean, there might be somebody that's turned on and says, "Hey, that's exactly what I'm looking for," but you're not going to get rocks thrown at you. You're not going to get refused service in a bar, restaurant, retail store. It's just very accepting. And so I probably need to go to some more smaller towns and see what it's like there, because I know the scene is diminishing in some of those places, but
I consider Palm Springs kind of a West Coast version of that, albeit you don't walk as much as you drive, but
right.
still a lot of licenses within a short period of a short space.
Yeah, and P-Town in season is kind of like that, and Fire Island in season is like that. Puerto Vallarta, there's certain pockets around the country that are like that, uh, particularly when they're in high season for day travel. But I don't know. Boys Town has kind of lost its charm a little bit.
In Chicago,
In Chicago, it's gentrified, or whatever you want to call it.
also they've moved north.
Yeah, and it's not the same as it used to be, but I'm just glad we've had these places over the years, and I'm glad there are people like you who are out there chronicling your own histories, whether it's specifically with the bars, or another thing that you do really well is talk about, you know, either political issues or health issues or whatever, and how you feel about them and how they impacted you at that time, or things of that nature, because so much of this was ignored. So much of our history was people writing about, a riot somewhere or a raid, and that doesn't really tell the whole story. I mean, there are so many other aspects of it. I'm glad there's people out there that are doing this.
I will kind of share the extremes of reception to my YouTube videos. I do one every other week, either a Bammer Tale where I tell a story from my life, or a Bammer Talk where I go into an issue of great importance to the community. And one of mine is a story of my visit to the Mine Shaft, the famous sex club in New York.
I
And
love that video, by the way. It's for before anybody goes to watch it, and we will put up the link to the channel, but it is adult graphic content. Do not watch that video if you are a puritanical monk and don't want to hear anything, very explicit. But it's a great video, and I love hearing those stories.
I tell a matter-of-fact story of seriously, the one time in my life that I've had anonymous sex. I'm a demisexual, so I don't really respond unless there's an emotional connection, but I was with friends on drugs, and I just wandered into a back room, and it happened to me. And I tell that story, and it has 103,000. By the time you watch this, it'll be a lot more views. And I'm pleased by the reception. And there are 463 comments, mostly positive. And again, I don't have a message except telling the truth.
Right.
As it was, as I experienced it. There's no morality to it. There's, some people think I sound like I have a stick up my butt because I
That wasn't a stick. I watched the full video. It was not a
Thank
stick.
you. So it is what it is. But that's my most popular video. Now, another video that I'm extremely proud of and would urge any thinking and caring LGBTQ person to watch is called A Call to Action. And it only has 500 views versus 100 plus thousand. And it is my imploring of our community to come together and to form real community, to reach out to each other, to find ways to agree to disagree, or to talk about issues. And even if, there are a lot of transphobic gay men who will tell me, I don't think that trans is part of my community, that I have nothing to do with them. And I will say, yes, you do. If you have any empathy at all in you, you will acknowledge that the path they've been on for 10 or 15 years is no different than the path you went on. Yes, it's around sexual dysphoria, sexual identity, and ours was around sexual orientation. But it's the same lack of acceptance, the same need to love yourself and to come out. And we need to band together and whatever the disagreements, to form a unified community that will stand up against the right wing's attempts to vilify us. And if we can do that, we will win any battles we face. So I urge people to watch that, even though it's an extremely, relatively unpopular video because it's too serious.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that that happens. But as you mentioned earlier with your Instagram, you know, you put up serious things on social media, and a lot of times they just get ignored. And then you put on, you know, some abstract photograph or something from, you know, that has very little meaning to the general world, and people latch onto it, and you see it get shared. It's like all these streaming videos that you see pop up if you're on any of the streaming apps or whatever. You see these videos come up that are so stupid, and you're like, why does this video have 27 million views? And then you have something really serious like what you're talking about there, and you know, you get 500 views, and you find out that the average viewer has only watched, you know, 8% of the video, and you're like, what's wrong with this world? But
I'm aware of human nature, and so I intentionally use a lot of thirst traps, clickbait. The photos I've taken of hot guys in Speedos over the last 50 years to attract the eyeballs in the hopes that they will read the 400-word narrative about a serious issue. And it tends to work, but if I just did a video this week on social media biases, and I talked about how the fact, if I put a person of color or a woman in my photos or in my videos, I'm going to get less than half as many likes. It's just because of people's hidden biases. So I do that anyway because I want to reach out and I want to show equal representation. But how do you play into people's openness? That's the real question.
well, that is a topic that we will have to cover at another time. But I do want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. And I want you to mention your YouTube handle is Bammer47.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And on Instagram, it's
At Bammer47.
okay. So Bammer47. And we will put links at the end of the video so you can see it in writing in case you aren't good at spelling. And we invite you to follow Mike, to watch some of his videos, to comment on them, to, you know, like them, to share them, because that's what makes this message get out. You know, you don't have to send money, you don't have to spend a fortune trying to do anything, but it's free to like a video, it's free to comment on a video, it's free to share a video on social media. So do it and help us get the word out about our gay history.
Well, like you, I believe in engagement. And so I put myself out there. I make myself available. And anybody that contacts me through a direct message or a comment on my site, I respond to. I also treat everyone with respect. I never tell anyone they're wrong or get angry at them. I try to find a way to bring us together as a family.
Well, we'll hope some of these people will connect with you, and we'll have more stories to tell next time we talk to you. Thanks so much, Mike.
I appreciate what you do.